This is VOA Africa. Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory in for Hashtag the U-Word. It's Thursday, August the 15th, and this is Africa 54. Ugandan online publishers criticize the government's new registration requirement. A Spanish migrant rescue ship heads to Italy after a judge overrules Interior Minister Matteo Salvini. And can Nigeria's new oil boss turn the country into a fuel exporter? Uganda's Communication Commission has implemented new social media regulations. Now all commercial online publishers must register with the government. The Commission says the publishers have to be watched to ensure they are posting appropriate content. Ugandan social media influencers and news organizations see the requirement as a step toward limiting freedom of speech and the press. Here's Halima Thumani with the details.
Bettina Tumhaise, known online as the Proud Farmer, posts videos promoting farming and giving farmers advice on how to improve their incomes. Tumhaise's number of followers may seem small in a country of 43 million people, but because she is doing well enough to make money off the posts, Ugandan authorities say online publishers like her must register so their content can be observed and regulated. Tumhaise says she'd rather be taxed than monitored.
If I'm posting and I'm getting 300 per post that I get, and I'm sure that you know this is what I'm getting, tell me, give me 1%, and I'll give it to you. But don't come hiding under registration when in actual sense you have your ways, that you have something else that you're trying to promote.
Uganda's Communications Commission says too much online content is unregulated with misinformation that can incite the public. Forcing those with influence to register, even those already licensed, will make them mindful of what they post, says UCC spokesman Ibrahim Bossa.
These are people who are online radios, online television, online publishers, but we're also saying that we have equally people who would be using online platforms like blogs, like Facebook, still for commercial purposes, and they earn money from it, and they actually disseminate information to wide audiences. The content they put out there is of importance, so we say they should register.
But bloggers like Rosbel Kagumire note that Uganda already has laws to regulate online communication and says the registration requirement is worrying.
We see these undertones are very political and very really rooted in the fact that Uganda is a very young country and the person who's seeking to stay in power longer is older. And the population which is going to vote will be much younger for the first time, and they are on the internet and they are visibly anti the status quo.
Uganda last year instituted a social media tax that many online publishers saw as a government effort to curb free speech. Nation Media Group editor Charles Bichache says requiring registration raises some concerns about press freedom, but is still in line with the law.
UCC is testing out how much it can go in terms of holding the media. And I think as media, we need to be able to fight back, but within the law.
While authorities can easily track whether Uganda's media outlets have registered, it's not yet clear how well they will trace individuals like bloggers and what enforcement will be used to ensure compliance. Halima Athmani for VOA News, Kampala.
Well, to Europe now, a Spanish rescue ship carrying migrants is heading to Italy's Lampedusa island after an Italian judge suspended the government ban on the ship from entering the nation's territorial waters. The rescue ship opened arms and had been treading water in the Mediterranean Sea for almost 2 weeks with 147 migrants on board. According to an open arms statement, an Italian judge ruled Wednesday that Interior Minister Matteo Salvini's order against the ship violates international law in light of the exceptionally grave and urgent situation due to the protracted stay of the migrants on our boat. Salvini says the judge's ruling set a bad precedent.
It is clear that there's a project to go back to open Italian ports and transform Italy into a refugee camp of Europe. As long as I'm alive, I will not surrender and I will resist this shame.
Well, Salvini says he will appeal the court's ruling, but it remains unclear if an appeal would stop the ship from docking on the tiny Mediterranean island. Another rescue boat, the Ocean Viking, operated by Doctors Without Borders and SOS Mediterranean, is also looking for a safe port. It has 356 mainly young Sudanese men on board. Now, thousands of migrant workers have come to a small region on Turkey's Black Sea coast to harvest hazelnuts. The region produces 2/3 of the world's supply of hazelnuts, but the harvest is hard work and offers increasingly diminishing returns for both the owners and their migrant workers, most of whom are Kurdish. Dorian Jones tells us more.
Millions of hazelnut trees cover the valleys of Ordu, a province in Turkey's Black Sea coast. This region provides 75% of the world's hazelnuts. Many of the trees grow on treacherous ravines, so harvesting the nut is hard and often dangerous work. Pickers work 7 days a week, 11 hours a day, for around $300 for the month-long season. Iskander, who does not want to give his last name, started picking at 15 years old. At 30, he's now in charge of a team of pickers.
We come here to work in a field for 15 days and then pack up everything and travel to higher villages and work another 15 days. But we do this work out of necessity. If you are not obliged to do this, it is a misery that no one can stand.
Iskander, like most pickers, made the 700-kilometer journey from Turkey's predominantly Kurdish region. The region has been devastated by the Turkish army's decades-long war against a Kurdish insurgency, so there are few jobs there. Iskander's mother, Mediha, who also was unwilling to give her full name, works with her son. Like tens of thousands of others, they were forced to evacuate their village by security forces, losing not only their home, but their livelihood.
In the past, we used to do agriculture. We had our own work. We used to keep vineyards, we herded animals, but we were left without anything, and out of necessity we had to come here. And here we work like slaves. There is nothing we can achieve.
Iskander, Mediha, and the other pickers bed down in a cattle shed for the month-long harvest. Most migrant workers are forced to stay in state-run camps. Authorities don't allow access to the camps, where conditions have been criticized by monitoring groups. Hazelnut grower Hilmi Uzunla, who employs Iskander and Mediha, says no one is making money because of falling prices, growing competition, and the increasing changes in climate.
Sales of hazelnuts only cover the expenses for the workers, fertilizer, and maintaining the trees. We do the harvest, then sell, but we only break even. After that, we go back to our other jobs to provide for our families.
For Iskander, he dreams of a life without having to harvest hazelnuts.
If I get a normal job with a minimum wage, I won't come back here next year. It would be enough for me to stay at my home, to be with my kids.
For Iskander and Mediha, weeks of toil remain. After hazelnuts, they move on to central Turkey for the potato season. Iskander says it will be some time before he sees his 3 young children again. Dorian Jones for VOA News, Ordu, Turkey.
Immigration raids in the U.S. apprehended more than 1,500 undocumented immigrants working at factories and other job sites last year. They're among more than 250,000 immigrants deported in 2018 by the Trump administration. But on average, only about 15 employers per year face criminal charges for hiring undocumented workers. VOA's Brian Patton has more in this report.
U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents recently raided 7 agricultural processing plants in the state of Mississippi, arresting some 680 designated removable aliens who were unlawfully working at the plants. Yet few of these companies are likely to be charged for violating federal statutes on the unlawful employment of aliens because it is usually difficult to prove they had prior knowledge their workers were in the country illegally. Penalties for hiring undocumented workers range from $100 per violation to $10,000 and up to 6 months in prison for multiple infractions. Anti-immigration groups say the lack of strong enforcement against business owners is failing to cut off a key incentive for illegal immigration: jobs.
We're attacking the limbs. We're not attacking the root of the problem.
Many companies utilize the E-Verify system, a voluntary government program that checks the legal status of workers. But even pro-business advocates admit it is a flawed system because fraudulent documents often go unchallenged, while at the same time giving employers legal cover to maintain their workforce.
My number one theory about E-Verify is that it doesn't work, and that's the only reason why it's popular, because politicians can look tough while pushing it, but know that it won't harm the local economy.
Immigrant rights groups object to working migrants being treated as criminals. Pro-business supporters want legal immigration expanded to address the labor shortage in the U.S.
The number one policy we need is to make it possible for lower and mid-skilled workers to be able to come to this country legally, to be able to work for a term of time, and then to be able to go back to their home countries.
Anti-immigration proponents dispute there is a labor shortage, only an unwillingness to pay living wages to workers, and want business owners to face more than the occasional fine for hiring undocumented immigrants.
They factor that in as a cost of doing business. And that has to change. And the only thing that will change that, I think, are severe penalties that could result in jail.
Both immigration critics and advocates agree enforcement measures have been ineffective, but there continues to be no consensus on how to reform the system. Brian Padden, VOA News, Washington.
Criminal justice activists have long complained that in America, routine traffic violations can turn poor people into criminals. The inability to pay fines leads to more fines and penalties, often turning communities against law enforcement. In Ferguson, Missouri, the unrelated shooting death of an unarmed black man 5 years ago led the community and the police to reassess these practices. VOA's Masood Variver reports.
For Ferguson's once embattled police force, it's back to basics. Police still stop motorists, but gone are the days when the city's black residents believed Ferguson's police officers saw them as potential sources of revenue.
Instead of giving us petty traffic tickets and things like that, they're trying to come up with programs that help us instead of hinder us as a community.
In 2014, a white officer shot and killed black teenager Michael Brown, igniting weeks of protests and putting the spotlight on how Ferguson and other cities punish poor communities through exorbitant penalties. Wesley Bell, a former activist and Ferguson City Council member, won a historic election last year to become St. Louis County's first African-American chief prosecutor.
When you look at the entire scope, Ferguson wasn't even one of the worst offenders.
And Bell says out of tragedy has come an opportunity.
In Ferguson, when you do something negative or positively, it registers sometimes locally, but oftentimes nationally. And so I think that's an opportunity to implement changes and reform that can reverberate across the nation.
Across the nation, states have taken notice. Missouri capped the amount of revenue cities can raise from traffic tickets at 20%. Texas passed a law requiring judges to assess an offender's ability to pay at sentencing.
We have seen reform. It's nowhere near enough, but we're making progress.
Among the areas of progress,
courts have stopped jailing people for outstanding fines and fees, at least directly.
And a half dozen states have stopped suspending driver's licenses for failing to pay fines. In September, nearly 1 million people in Texas will get their driver's licenses back. In Ferguson, the criminal justice issues exposed by Brown's death haven't gone away. A recent report by the state's attorney general says that since 2014, racial disparities in traffic stops have increased in Ferguson and across the state.
There tonight, and you'd see a line of mostly African-American people coming out of that court, even though they're only 67% of the population, there'll be like 98% of the people in court.
Ferguson residents say they're determined to fix the problem, even as the city struggles to comply with reforms required by the Justice Department. Masood Farivar, VOA News, Ferguson, Missouri.
We'll be right back.
The lyrics could be French,
English,
Portuguese,
Bantu,
Arabic.
It is the beat.
The African beat that counts.
The beat does all the translations.
It cuts across all languages and gives us the understanding that this is the African beat.
It is so distinct
and adhesive.
It binds us together.
African Beat on the Voice of America. For more information, visit our website at www.voanews.com/AfricanBeat.
I am Shaka Sali, host and senior editor of VOA's international call-in talk show, Straight Talk Africa.
Today we'll examine the tobacco industry.
We pretty much touch on anything that you can think of: politics, health issues, human rights issues, you name it, we talk about it. The issues that we discuss are pertinent to most people on the African continent. A very, very rare and unique opportunity to interact with their leaders.
I'm Clara Frank, and here's what's trending. The National Football League and Jay-Z's entertainment and sports representation company are teaming up for events and social activism. The NFL not only will use Jay-Z's Rock Nation to consult on its entertainment presentations, including the Super Bowl halftime show, but it will work with the rapper and entrepreneur's company to strengthen community through music and the NFL's Inspire Change initiative. Inspire Change was created by the league after an agreement with a coalition of players who demonstrated during the national anthem to protest social and racial injustice in the U.S. Next up, most of us can prevent excessive body odor with deodorant. But for those who need extra help, this futuristic-style bodysuit could help combat those unpleasant smells. The long-sleeve bodysuit, called Skin 2, is embedded with healthy probiotic bacteria. The bacteria in the fabric of the bodysuit is in areas where you are most likely to sweat, including the armpits and upper back. It's activated by contact with moisture on the body. The designers now plan to commercialize the idea for a new sportswear range. And finally, evolution gave human ancestors big brains and the ability to walk upright. But it took away their tails. Now, designers in Japan are looking to give them back. A team at Keio University in Tokyo has created a jointed appendage worn at the waist that they say could help steady people with balance problems and provide an extra margin of safety for construction workers and other physical laborers working in precarious or physically challenging environments. The tail could also be used to provide extra realism to virtual reality games. And that's what's trending today.
Well, opinion polls show that former Vice President Joe Biden continues to lead the large pack of Democratic presidential contenders for 2020. But concerns about Biden's age and his habits of making verbal gaffes have some Democrats questioning whether he would be the best candidate to face President Donald Trump. Here's VOA national correspondent Jim Malone.
The former Vice President and candidate for President of the United States, Joe Biden.
In Iowa, Joe Biden looks to solidify his status as the Democratic frontrunner by targeting President Donald Trump.
But folks, if we give him 8 years, I really believe this from the bottom of my heart. He will forever change the character and nature of who we are. That's why we have to defeat Donald Trump in 2020. Period. Period, period, period.
Biden remains atop national and key state polls for now, but he faces strong competition from several rivals, including Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren.
2020 is our chance. We can make this government work for all of America. Let's do this, Democrats. Dream big, fight hard, let's win.
God love you, Mr. Vice President. Despite the fact he is 76, Biden remains an energetic campaigner. But he's also drawn scrutiny for a series of recent verbal gaffes, including comments on helping the poor.
Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids. Wealthy kids, black kids, agency.
Biden has also become a frequent target for the man he would like to face in next year's election, President Trump.
Joe Biden is not playing with a full deck. This is not somebody you could have as your president. But if he got the nomination, I'd be thrilled. We all talk about these things. I did it.
Biden has taken some hits in the first two debates, but has also shown some resiliency, says analyst Vanessa Beasley.
There's still some good evidence that people in the Democratic Party think that he is the person with the best chance of beating Trump. I think there's a lot of forgiveness in that crowd right now because they want him to maintain that status of the most name recognition, you know, the highest chance of beating Trump.
The first votes in the Democratic primary campaign do not come until February, and that leaves plenty of time for rivals to gain on Biden, says Kyle Kondik.
I think if Biden is still leading as we get into September and October, after we've had a few debates, that will prove that he's a more durable frontrunner. But it's also possible that under this heightened amount of scrutiny, that some of his support may go to some of these other candidates, and then maybe it'll really turn into a truly wide open race.
Democrats also remain split over whether to focus mostly on Trump or push for sweeping economic and social reform, says analyst Darrell West.
A lot of the current debate among the Democrats is, do we need small changes and basically bringing America back to what it was like before Trump, or do we need much more substantial changes?
That dilemma will be on display again when Democrats gather for a third debate in Houston next month. Jim Malone, VOA News, Washington.
U.S. President Donald Trump says a trade agreement with China could be delayed until it reaches a humane resolution with Hong Kong's pro-democracy demonstrators, even suggesting he could personally broker an agreement between Beijing and the dissidents. The president took to Twitter late Wednesday night, boasting about his administration's upper hand against Beijing in the ongoing negotiations to end the trade war between the two countries. Trump says Xi Jinping, his Chinese counterpart, very much has the respect of his people, and he had zero doubt that if President Xi wants to quickly and humanely solve the Hong Kong problem, he can do it. Prior to Wednesday's tweets, Trump appeared to take a hands-off stance on the protest, saying earlier this week the Hong Kong situation is a very tough situation, but I'm sure it will work out. Hong Kong residents are demonstrating over their perceived erosion of freedom and lack of autonomy and the Chinese control of the territory. Well, the new managing director for Nigeria State Oil Company is planning to become partners with a private refinery and turn the oil-producing nation into a fuel supplier for the region. Amir Wamsley reports.
Nigeria's new oil chief is on a mission to turn the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation into a world-class state oil company. In office since last month, Managing Director Mele Kolo Kyari told Reuters in an interview that he has a blueprint for transforming the firm. It includes a plan to sign a contract with Nigerian billionaire Aliko Dangote, who is building Africa's largest refinery with a capacity of 650,000 barrels per day, and pushing for more transparency in the oil-rich nation by publishing the full list of those holding the country's crude oil contracts and publishing audited accounts of the state oil firm's books.
There's this perception that Nigeria is not it's a very unfair business environment, and we're going to do everything possible to make that open. Business is open so that people can actually predict what we're going to do next, and I believe that that will going to help us.
Nigeria's contract lists have not been published for years, and the state oil company has been marred for decades by a reputation for corruption. Kyari says the openness and a plan to improve commercial terms for oil firms would spur investment that's been hampered by uncertainty and opacity. The new boss also wants to turn Nigeria into a fuel supplier for the region.
When we produce, there's a market for it, either here within the West African sub-region or beyond it. And the product market is there, so we know this. So we do this, we can now satisfy local needs and also possibly export products.
OPEC member Nigeria is Africa's largest oil producer. Crude sales bring about 90% of foreign exchange. although its own ailing refineries means it imports most refined fuel. Chiari says there are plans to revamp the refineries and said both government and private funding are being considered.
Well, that's Matt Womersley of Reuters with that report. Well, stock markets in Japan fell Thursday, but not a steep drop experienced by U.S. markets one day earlier. That amplified recession fears. U.S. market futures pointed to slight gains Thursday, rebounding from Wednesday's trading that sent the Dow Jones Industrial Average, Standard & Poor's 500 and NASDAQ all down 3%. Now, Tokyo's Nikkei index closed down 1.2% Thursday, while elsewhere in Asia, China's Shanghai Composite Index and Hong Kong's Hang Seng rose slightly. Major European indices fell sharply Wednesday. Analysts pointed to weak German and Chinese economic data as warning signs of a possible world economic slowdown. And President Trump blamed Wednesday's economic news on the Federal Reserve Board, tweeting, "The Fed is holding us back. They have raised interest rates too much and too fast. Now it's too slow to cut." Well, a couple tying the knot in a small Egyptian village will tell the story of their marriage ceremony being run by a woman, and conventional practice in a country where the job of marriage officiant is typically reserved for men. But in the northern village of Kanayat, Mal Soleiman, 43, is a licensed notary who has officiated nearly 3,000 marriages since receiving her license. It took her whole year competing against 11 male applicants for the job, and was happy that the law preferring candidates with the highest academic degrees for the job was properly applied. But it was not an easy task. When she finally opened her office in 2008, customers gradually came in, and she is now even considered better than her male counterparts. Well, it's been very hot on the U.S. East Coast, but how badly do New Yorkers want to cool off? In honor of National Ice Cream Sandwich Day, processed meat company Oscar Mayer has created two flavors of ice dog sandwiches. One is a spicy mustard ice cream, and the other is ice cream infused with candied pieces of Oscar Mayer's hot dog. In it, 500 samples were handed out in front of the company's famous 27-foot-long Wienermobile at New York's Bryant Park on Wednesday. The verdict? They ranged from gross and yum. A social media contest will give people a chance to win a shipment of the frozen treats directly to their home. Well, and that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, have a good evening.